it all the time. People always ask me, do you love listening to music when you get home? My answer is always no. I don't listen to music.
So when you go home, what music do you listen to?
I don't.
Just none at all.
I refuse to listen to music.
Just audiobooks.
Audiobooks, podcasts, things like that.
What a terrible worship pastor you are.
Because, well, no. And this started before I was a full-time worship leader at all. Was because I used to work in the recording industry, and once my ears, my brain started to learn what I was hearing, I could no longer enjoy music. I would just critique everything. I'd be like, that snare has too much compression.
That's like a barista who tried us to order a coffee, but they know what they want and they know how it's supposed to be made, and everybody makes it wrong.
Yeah.
Except for them.
Yes.
Well, welcome back to the podcast, everyone. We're so glad that you're listening. My name is Abby, and this is my co-host, Jordyn. And this morning, we're going to be jumping into 90s worship music.
Yay!
Yeah, and we have the worship pastor with us, so this should be fun.
Fun. Most of the 90s music, as we were doing research for this, I found a lot of the stuff that I was like, oh, that's 90s. Wasn't 90s. It was like 2001, 2002, and so we had to kind of stretch the bounds of this conversation to kind of early 2000s, definitely not the 80s. So it's 91, 92 into the 2000s.
I know on my list, when we get to the list of top 10 90s music, some of them were written in the 90s, but they were topping the charts in 2001. So 2001. So I'm still going to call that 90s because it was written and it was being sung in the 90s.
Perfect.
All right. Well, before we jump in today, I've got some background, some history of contemporary worship music. And before Jordyn geeks out on all of the fun technical 90s worship music stuff, I want to jump in here with the history of the music. All right, so
enlighten us, Abby.
You may think that contemporary worship music was founded in the 90s, but in fact, it was founded in the 1950s in France. And they were putting modern melodies with old hymns to make it sound younger and to attract youth, because they were finding that they were losing the younger generation. And then they were opening up cafes that were specifically targeting young adults and teenagers, and they were starting youth groups there and singing this kind of younger generation of music. And they kind of noticed that there was a need, that they were missing this audience, and this was their way of trying to bring them back to the church and get them involved. And so churches started seeing what they were doing, and they started realizing that they needed to embrace these things in order to get their youth groups involved and to kind of introduce this younger sound to draw in the youth. So it all started back in the 1950s, and then slowly churches around the world started adapting it, and churches were inspired by popular music, and they worked on making their music sound more contemporary, kind of match that popular music vibe, and the whole goal was to make it so that the church didn't sound so outdated and old. And some people, they hoped that it was a fad. It was not a fad. In fact, it's been around for a long time. And the 90s is really kind of when globally this kind of music was accepted, and it's kind of, it is what we think of when we think of contemporary Christian music. We think of the 90s because that's when it was becoming incredibly popular. In fact, I've got a fun fact for you.
All right.
Hillsong, they are a popular worship band, and they were founded a long time ago, but they were mostly popular in their home country of Australia until the 90s, when they released their cover of Shout to the Lord, and that shot them into global stardom as a worship band. So there you go.
There we go. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is a great... if we ever do worship trivia...
There you go.
We now have the answer.
The year was 1950.
1950.
Yeah. All right. So one of the questions that I had going into this topic was, what makes an iconic worship song? So I don't know. I'm curious to hear what you think, Jordyn, but basically all I was able to find was that the 90s was the introduction of the praise team. So we moved from this whole choir with an organ sound to having individual instruments on stage and singers with their own microphones. So we saw a lot of that. Also, acoustic guitars, drums, piano, bass, those were also all introduced. Sometimes you'd even see a flute or a violin. So some orchestra instruments. I definitely remember when we've had flutes and violin here. So fun times. And then also tambourines and very dramatic fade-ins. That's what I think of when I think 90s worship music. So what Jordyn would you consider like iconic 90s worship song vibes?
Well, like you just said, it's that transition. 90s was like that transition period from the choir and the organ. So let's walk a little bit through this. Let's go on a little adventure, and we'll answer this question, hopefully, through this little walk about the olden times. So in the olden days, apologies to our senior listeners, I'm talking about your generation. You know exactly who you are as I continue to talk about this. Church was worship, and a piano. So it's based around a piano and an organ, which you mentioned, right? Mm-hmm. So, and a choir, and the worship director or even the pastor a lot of times would stand up and say, "Let's open our hymnals to page 777 to the song, 'How great is thy faithfulness unto the blessed assurance when the roll is called up yonder in the garden alone.'" And remember, we're singing verses only 1, 2, and 4. Nobody sings verse 3. So the piano provided the rhythmic direction as well as melodic cues. So from like a musical standpoint, it really gave a lot of the foundational direction, movement, the arrangement of the song. And then the organ, which is probably the most underrated instrument in all of human history, was actually designed to mimic the human voice. So when the organ was playing, it provided support for the congregation, which gave them more confidence so they'd sing louder, but also the choir, it helped them sing the right notes. So that was really helpful. It was the first time the organist was in charge of ambiance. Before we called it that. It was called prelude, postlude. It was not called ambiance, but that's exactly what they were doing. If you sit in church and you hear that very worshipful noise that just sits there forever, it's like very ethereal and fluttery. That's what organs did. We just kind of changed the sound of it to synthesizers, which are coming up here in just a minute. In that beautiful, complex trifecta of piano, organ, and choir, it was amazing, complex harmonics. It was a very unified movement from verse 1 to verse 2 to verse 4. And that was it. And that was super great. What a beautiful time that was. And as you hit on, there's been this long journey that went, kind of as things in America started to change. We hit like the 60s and 70s, rock and roll. The hippies, like you mentioned, brought in their acoustic guitars, their drums, their synthesizers. And so things started to really change. Insert the worship wars. And I'm not going to dive into this, but all you need to do is get on YouTube after this podcast and just type in what were the worship wars or worship wars commentary, and we'll see in 6 months it's a very deep hole that you can just listen to content forever about. And that's essentially hymns versus the contemporary Christian movement, and it still is happening to this day in some churches, but generally I think the war has mostly been won in the sense of we love Jesus and we're going to keep it moving. I could talk about this stuff all day.
Clearly.
Yes. All right, let's jump into the 80s because that gets us to the 90s. In the 80s, we had super crazy rock and roll. That phenom was sweeping the nation. You had Guns N' Roses. You had, I think, Aerosmith. You had there are people that I've worked with in the recording studio screaming at me right now, "You forgot!" And it's a list of 50 rock bands. Most rock bands were in the 70s and 80s. So rock was this massive, big deal. And the Christian culture, kind of the Christian community by and large, like didn't want to engage in that. So something that really was unfortunate was their counter to rock music was songs like this.
Yes.
The song Mighty God, My Redeemer Lives,
Oh, I remember.
which there's nothing necessarily wrong with those songs, but as you just heard from the sound bites, if I compared that with rock music and what was happening in the 80s, if you're a young person, where are you going to spend your time? I'm not being a hypocrite. I'm not being anything other than somebody stating the obvious. So, not to say there wasn't some Christian guys that were knocking it out of the park in the 80s. Michael W. Smith was putting some Secret Ambition. He's got some Place in This World, had an epic guitar solo. I don't know for a fact, but I could guess this kind of pandering to the youth and sin was associated with rock and roll, and distorted guitars were looked on quite poorly by some in the church. But with the reactions from young Christians filling up stadiums to hear Christian artists in the late 80s, early 90s, well, that's where it went. So as we moved into the 90s, flying in on the scene, a lot of these solo artists went from their own careers, like the Michael W. Smith, the Amy Grant, DC Talk, Rich Mullins, Sandy Patty, Stephen Curtis Chapman, the Newsboys, and there's a million others. But at that point, there was this big launch into, like what you're talking about, these are bands, these are singer-songwriters, and those guys who were doing like even their solo careers before kind of pivoted a bit to worship. Because as believers, they kind of looked at the Christian worship world and went, wait, that doesn't look anything like what the young people are doing. Well, how come there's no young people in church? It's like, well, they're too busy singing Guns N' Roses music. But now that we've had a whole bunch of background information about these 90s, so the question is, what makes a 90s hit a 90s hit?
A 90s worship hit.
Yes.
Yes.
So you had to take all of these elements we've talked about and smash them together. So you had the beginning of the worship leader. So you had this like dominant vocal, which in the past you didn't. You had to have some sort of the element of electric guitar, the synthesizer, this very dynamic. It was the very beginning of like that postmodern rock genre that worship really now is more identified as, is like this postmodern rock with like hints of pop, I guess, now as we're really moving, but I might get stuck in this generation. We'll see. So I think the best way to say, what makes a 90s hit is go over our top 10 90s hits.
Okay. So number 10. All right. So I put There Is None Like You. I don't have the artists on all of these, so I don't know who wrote it or sang it, but do you remember that one?
Is that the There Is None Like You?
Yep.
Okay. That's a good one. I do like that song. That song is not on my list.
Oh, really? Okay.
My number 10 is Lord, I Lift Your Name on High.
Oh, I totally remember that.
Lord, I lift your name.
That did not make it on my list, but it was an honorable mention on my list. I definitely remember like being in Awanas, actually, I think, and doing all of the hand motions to that song. Oh, I remember
from
that.
heaven to earth to
yes.
show the way. Yeah, I remember those hand motions too. But
Yep.
luckily, this is not on video. All right, number 9, Abby, what you got?
All right, number 9, I have Breathe.
Breathe.
remember
This
that?
is the air I breathe.
I'm gonna let you do all the singing today. So
That's fine.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
This is like a just a game show of does Jordyn know this song?
There you go.
I love that song. That's a classic.
Is that higher on your list?
It actually isn't on my list because there are so many songs.
Okay.
But I love that song. Mine is My Redeemer Lives is my number 9. My Redeemer Lives. And love that song. It's great. I don't want to get too into it, but I love that song.
Okay.
All right, number 8.
Number 8, Better Is One Day.
Ooh.
Yes.
That's a good one.
This one I definitely remember singing like late into the 2000s, but...
We just sang it like a month ago here.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
I think I blacked that out.
It's okay. It happens. Yes. That's a good one. And that one's been done so many different ways over the years that it's got enough variety. My number 8 is Trading My Sorrows. I'm trading my sorrows.
I feel like we didn't sing that song a whole lot at this church. So that is not one, like, I know that song, but it's not one that I think of when I think classic.
We're saying
90s.
yes, Lord, yes,
Oh, yes.
Lord, yes, yes, Lord.
I don't know.
Amen.
Whatever worship leader was here at that time just wasn't into that one. So
It opens with the coolest bass line. Do, 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 do. It's got some like Louie Louie vibes almost. Anyway. All right, Abby, what's your number 7?
all right. Do you remember You Are Holy? It was like
The
that.
Prince of Peace, back and forth one.
Yeah.
You are holy. That's a good one. I didn't realize that was in the 90s.
Well, that's what the 90s top lists on Spotify say. It could be a 2000s. I don't know.
That's okay. It was
But I
probably written
definitely
in the
remember
90s.
singing that in chapels at school all the time.
Yeah.
You know, when they had the projector and,
The
you know,
overhead.
yeah, the
stuff.
overhead projector.
Oh, man.
Somebody was flipping the slides.
There's that slide person. Slides people, if you're a church volunteer and you run slides today and you don't know what it's like to slide the transparencies from an overhead projector,
You have it so easy.
you have it so easy. So,
But also, we love you and can't do
we
church without
appreciate
you.
you, but I just need you to know. And if you don't think it was that hard, I'm sure I can go find an overhead projector somewhere. And first of all, I'm going to have you try to make a transparency. And then
And
we're
like
gonna do
edit mid-song, edit the lyrics.
yeah, that's right. With like an expo pen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the worst. Oh, man, that was fun. All right.
All right, you're number 7,
My
Jordan.
number 7 is Shout to the Lord, which pretty standard.
Yep.
All right, what's your number 6?
All right. Let's see. Oh, Awesome God was not my number 6.
Number 6?
Yep. Hey, it's getting up there.
I mean, that's not great.
It's higher on your list, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's okay.
It might even be on my list twice, actually.
It was that
The
good.
original and the chorus that Michael W. Smith does. Anyway, we'll get to that later.
Okay.
We'll get to that later.
All right. What's your number 6?
I Could Sing of Your Love Forever. Oh, what a good one.
Classic.
Super kumbaya. Actually, your dad made a kind of a joke about kumbaya songs last
Oh, yeah?
week in his message. This is the song that came to mind. It's like, oh, Christians just sit around singing kumbaya. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, I could sing of your love forever. And I'm like, that's exactly what somebody would, that's what was in my mind. All right, Abby, what's your number 5?
All right. Number 5, Everlasting God.
The You Are the
Yeah.
Everlasting
I think
God.
in the 2000s, Lincoln Brewster did a version of it. I don't think he was the original. I could be wrong. I don't know.
I don't know. Lincoln.
But
I could do a podcast on Lincoln Brewster. Oh, he's so awesome.
It's a 90s songs, but I remember singing that in the 2000s. So, but I remember loving that one.
The guitar solos. I remember
right.
hearing kids try to do those and like with like a youth band. And I'm like, no, don't do it. And I met some. Then like the adults would stand up and they're like, the adults are like, I've trained my whole life to play this Lincoln Brewster solo, and they would crush it. And everybody in the congregation's like, Jesus, yes. All right.
All right, you're number 5.
You're like unleashing this side of me that's not very professional. Above All by Michael W. Smith.
Oh, I don't know if I remember that one.
Crucified, laid behind a
yes.
stone. Yep.
That was a good one. Okay. We on number 4?
Did you do your number 5 already?
Yeah, I did. Everlasting God.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. All
Yep,
right.
number
so
4.
number 4, coming down to the home stretch. We Fall Down.
Yeah, the We Fall Down. Okay, cool. Love that song.
Over it. Okay, next
Okay,
one.
over it. I do love that song. That's one of those you could. I think that one's kind of due for like an end of a new modern worship song. Like that could be that the chorus
little
of that is
reprise
really
of that.
is really pretty. My number 4 is Place in This World.
Oh, yeah.
So good. It's so good. If you haven't listened to that song, go listen to it. And it actually fits really well with the theme of identity. So if you're struggling with your identity, or if you listen to our Disney series that's like kind of all about identity, go listen to that song. It's awesome.
Okay, cool.
All right, Abby, number 3.
All right, number 3.
Top 3.
Oh, I got to find it on my list. I don't see him.
Abby doesn't have a top 3.
I missed number 3 when I was writing my list.
It's all good.
Okay, you're number 3 because I can't find it.
My number 3 is "Open the Eyes of My Heart," and that's like a double-edged sword because I'm so over that song, but I appreciate it so much for the impact that it's had.
Do you want to hear a fun fact?
Yes.
Randy Travis, classic country singer, he did a cover of "Open the Eyes of My Heart."
I saw that on YouTube, and I didn't listen to it. I'm gonna
Now
go
you
back
need to listen to it.
it.
Yeah. I think that song, "Open the Eyes of My Heart" and "Shout to the Lord," they were covered by like everyone, every Christian music artist, and even some, country artists were doing covers of those songs.
Oh yeah.
All right.
You got number 2?
Number 2. Yes, I have a number 2. "God of Wonders," Mac Powell. Yeah. It was written in 1999.
I was gonna say, that.
It was, I looked this up because it's right on the cusp. It was topping charts in like the 2000, 2001, but it was technically written and sung in the 1990s.
There's the God of Wonders beyond our galaxy. Cool. Oh,
that one is so good.
That's a good song. I'm a big fan.
All right, what's your number 2?
Number 2, "The Heart of Worship." I'm coming back to the heart of worship. Beautiful. Love it.
All right, we're down to number 1. Okay, mine is "Did You Feel the Mountains Tremble?" Because it's one that I still like today. Like, some of these songs on here, they were good in the 90s. They can be left in the 90s. But that one I still like.
That's the one. I know I've heard it, but like I like couldn't identify that one like at all off the top of my head. Like it didn't even cross my mind.
Really?
Yeah. No.
I thought we sang it a couple weeks ago.
No.
No? Has it been a while? We've sung it in the last year.
I haven't sang it.
Really?
Since I've been here.
Boy.
So I mean that still could be within the last year, but very closely.
Okay.
My number 1 is "Awesome God." It's just so good. It's got energy. It's got passion. The way it's been done over the years, it's just, it's so good. There's little kids that still know hand motions. Their parents are raising them right. They know the hand motions. And there's people in their 30s that know the hand motions still.
I feel like that song is such a great example of what a dramatic worship, like super dramatic 90s worship song sounds like.
That's why it's
like that is an
apex.
Intense song.
Yes. Oh, so good.
Also knew all of the hand motions to that song too.
Yeah. I mean, it was one of the first ones I learned on piano, but I didn't learn the Rich Mullins one. I learned the Michael W. Smith one where he kind of intros it kind of slowly. Rich Mullins does this like big Anyway, I didn't learn that one. That one was way too far beyond me.
Okay, so out of all the songs that we've talked about, what is one of these 90s songs that you would play on a Sunday morning, like in the next couple of weeks? Like this is still iconic, classic worship.
What is? I mean,
and it could be a redone version, but
yeah.
You wouldn't try to do "Awesome God"?
Oh yeah, I could totally I could tag "Awesome God" this week, and nobody would think twice. I could walk over to our planning center, put it in, and it'd be awesome. I think that one would be easy. It wouldn't be the verses; it would just be the chorus. I also feel like there's a place for. I think it was one of yours, the one that we were talking about that needs a reprise. I can't think of it off the top of my head. I think it was like 5 or 4, I think, on your list.
4 is "We Fall Down."
Yeah.
Was it that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we cry, holy, holy. Yeah.
Okay,
absolutely.
but if you were to do the full song, not just a reprise of it, what song off of here would you do?
Oh, I could do that. That one could definitely do.
I would not be mad if "God of Wonders" like made its way into our worship in the next couple of weeks.
That'd be awesome. I'd be down for that. I would love to just do like a 90s Sunday or like one 90s song for a month. So like the rest of the set's normal, but like one
one throwback.
Whoa! Haven't heard that one in a while, and hopefully it goes away for a while, like. But I love it. This is such a fun topic, and it's so nostalgic, and it's like Although I realized I messed up my list, and I didn't actually say what would have been my number 6.
Oh.
So I'm going to go back for it really quick.
Okay.
Shine by the Newsboys.
Oh, okay. I don't think of this as worship music, but I totally loved that song.
I feel like it definitely could be worship music, but...
A lot of the Newsboys stuff, I guess I never thought of as worship music back in the day, but...
Could you imagine like
I
a
love
group of
the
people
Newsboys.
shine, make them wonder what you got,
Oh, so good.
make them wish that they would not. Oh, it'd be so fun.
Okay, so what's your favorite Christian artist? This could be from the 90s. This doesn't have to be a worship artist, but just like favorite 90s Christian artist.
The easiest question you could ask.
Okay.
It's Michael W. Smith. I mean, there's no one close. God is above, but there's no one close. like, Smitty. Oh man,
so good.
Who is yours? Because I could just sit in this moment and just, I'm like reminiscing the Friends Forever tour.
I know that you love Michael W. Smith, and yes, he was like a father of contemporary worship music, but his stuff just isn't that exciting. I definitely loved Chris Tomlin. Do you remember the band Avalon?
I do remember the band Avalon.
You're like cringing.
I do remember the band
They had
Avalon.
one album that I absolutely loved, and I loved Casting Crowns. And technically, they were putting out stuff in the 90s.
Casting Crowns is awesome.
Yes.
Well, in the 90s is where we hit a lot of those like those rock bands, and like into the early 2000s, you see like Building 429, and like that was like my first rock concert, even though it was a Christian concert. Oh, my eardrums were bleeding, but it was amazing. Yeah, and one thing we didn't touch on a lot of was this was kind of the late 90s was like, we kind of touched on Hillsong, but like Hillsong took off 90s, early 2000s. And there's a couple other of those bigger church music companies that kind of took off. And
Passion was huge.
Yeah, that's who I was thinking of, Passion. Yeah. But they did a lot of covers. I don't remember if Passion wrote a ton of their own music. I don't. That's above my pay grade. All right, so if there's one lesson we could take away from today, it's what?
Ooh. The 90s music is not bad. That's your surface level one. Yes. And it's important to stay relevant to engage that younger audience.
Amen. Let's hear from you. Send us an email. Send us your top 10 or maybe your favorite song. Send it to FireSidepodcast@paulsbocc.com. We'd love to hear from you, or if you're here on Sunday, just let us know what it is.
Favorite 90s worship song.
Yeah. So we are super excited that you're listening and joining us. This has been the Fireside Podcast. I'm Jordyn. That's Abby. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. And power and love, our God is an awesome